Good afternoon. I think it's time to get started. This is a webinar about iC3D Automates, specifically in combination with FileTrain. So in fact, we're going to talk about packaging automation. The major part of this will be presentation. That is because iC3D Automate is a command line tool, which means that it is not necessarily that easy to show something. But I will be doing bits and pieces of demo as well. What are we going to talk about? Well, I want to have a very short introduction of iC3D Suite. I think most of the names of the participants that I can see right now probably know what iC3D Suite is. I have just 3 slides, I think, with a bit of an overview. And then I will show one example in the application so that you can see what exactly it is if you're not familiar with it. And then we go on to automation, and automation leads to FileTrain, and then those 2 subjects can be combined. So let's start with iC3D Suite. iC3D Suite is an application from a company called Creative Edge Solutions, and it does real-time packaging simulation and design. And what is very cool about it is that it is all in one. There are no modules that you have to purchase. So the application contains everything in at once. Next to that, there is still a link to Adobe Illustrator or to the built-in PDF editor that it has, so you can very easily update graphics that you are applying to models and so on. It features a whole range of advanced visual effects, and I've listed some of those, like image-based lighting, but also shadows through ambient occlusion or additional lighting setups that you can add. It can do floor reflections. It can do special materials like foils, varnishes, holographic materials, lenticular materials. And it can do that on a very wide range of objects, ranging from carton to bottles to flexible packaging, to anything that you can think of, basically. It can use existing models, so you can create something in 3ds Max or in another 3D editing application and then simply import that into iC3D Suite. But it can also design its own models. It has a 2D object designer for bottles and cups and everything that has this kind of radial symmetry. It has a 3D shape modeler that allows you to design more irregular shapes like rectangular bottles or butter cups or apple trays or whatever you can think of that in that type of area. And then a carton fold designer to import DXF or PDF die cuts from a package and then fold those. Flexible container designer, a tube designer, a candy bar designer. So all of these built-in template designers that allow you to very quickly design a 2D model. It can, of course, combine multiple objects in a scene. It has a shelf system that very quickly allows you to see your designed model together with other models that you've created, to see multiple types of a package together, or see a package next to packages from competition, for example. And it can export to a whole range of things, including to iC3D Opsys, which is a web-based platform to share 3D models with clients. So because this is very theoretical and because I'm going to use this model later on, let me open something up for you in iC3D Suite simply to show some of the features in there. So this is iC3D Suite, so one application with all of the different possibilities built in, as I said, and then it will take just a second to open up this package that I want to show. And what you can see is that this is a carton fold package. It was folded from an imported DXF die cut. And then this package can now be rotated. You can see that it leaves a reflection on the white background, the way I have put it up here. It has this gold color that reflects actually environment light. That's the image-based lighting that you see. And it has this emboss on another gold element as well. So this is the model that I'm going to be using for some of the automation parts in a second. This is carton fold, but as I saw, and as you can see here at the bottom, you have also all of these template designers to create all of these other types of packages. So basically, just about any type of package is possible. And the design here, so the actual graphics were done in Illustrator, and you have the link to Illustrator to simply put those on the package afterwards so that you can see them as a 3D model. And like I said, afterwards you can then generate high-res images. I could export a 3D PDF, or I could upload this to OPSIS, and OPSIS would allow me to share that model simply through the browser without any other plugin needed, meaning that my client could even look at this on iPad, rotate it, see a built-in animation, and so on and so on. So very, very briefly, this is iC3D Suite. If you're not familiar with it, we have a number of other recorded webinars on our website. Just go to 4ps.com and look under tutorials. You'll see a long list of webinar recordings, and I think 5 or 6 of them are about iC3D Suite, showing everything from an introduction to complete use cases. So that is the iC3D Suite part. Like I said in the beginning, I don't want to spend too much time on this because what we want to talk about during this webinar is the need for automation in this case. And why? Well, because iC3D Suite is a very manual application to begin with. You have to create this design, to create this T package. I had to import the DXF file. I had to specify all the folding angles. I had to place the correct artwork on that. So that's all a lot of manual work before things are done. But that manual work in many cases leads to a number of other tasks that are very often time-consuming and error-prone. Error-prone because they're boring. Humans are not very good at boring tasks without making mistakes. And the question, of course, is can we do something to cut out that manual and time-consuming work? And there are 2 examples that I want to list here simply to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So the first example is a situation where I develop an iC3D model, and I do that inside of iC3D Suite, so I spend all the time working in there. And then as a second step, once my model is correct, I need to create a set of pictures from different camera perspectives. Very, very common. You create these models to share with a customer, with a client, and depending on the client, they probably have a specification of what they want. And that might be 3 different high-res images. It might be 10 different high-res images, and typically from specific camera angles. Now, you can do that in iC3D Suite. You can set up a specific camera angle and save that. But I would still have to go through all 10 of those camera angles manually, export the image each time, and that is a relatively time-consuming process because the file has to be rendered, and so on and so on. So it's a time-consuming thing. And then on top of that, potentially I need to export Collada files. I might be able, or I might have to export 3D PDF. I might want to upload this to OPSIS. So apart from the creative step that I have, the first step in this example, which is developing the iC3D model, I have a whole range of other steps that will be more or less the same for every model that I create, but are time-consuming and tedious. Second use case is even more time-consuming, and it's, again, a very common thing to happen. And the first step, again, is developing an iC3D model. That T-box that I showed you is, again, a good example. I create that in iC3D Suite. I save that as an iC3 file. Now, the problem is that in many cases, you'll have multiple flavors of that box. And in the case of the T box, it is, in fact, the case. I have 3 different designs. I have the one I showed you, but then I have 2 other pieces of Illustrator artwork that also need to be put on the box. And then again, I need to go through the steps of creating pack shots, saving the modified iC3 file for all of those variants, exporting Collada files, uploading them to OPSIS, and so on and so on. So in this scenario, you have one base file that you start from, and then from that base file, you want to create multiple versions. And the multiple versions could be because there are multiple tastes. It could be because you have artwork with different languages on it that you have to create. And so, yes, there is time that you'll spend on the model itself, but once that is done, you'll have to spend what might be a larger amount of time creating all of these different variants of the file. So what's the solution? Of course, there is a solution, or we wouldn't be having this webinar. The solution is iC3D Automate. And iC3D Automate is an application. It's a separate application from iC3D Suite. It's from the same vendor, obviously, and it uses the same technology, obviously, the same rendering engine and so on. But it's a separate application. It doesn't have any user interface. It's a command line application. And because it's a command line application, it can easily be integrated in applications that can drive such command line tools. And that could be FileTrain, it could be Switch, it could be Automation Engine, it could be DAM systems or MIS systems or web portals, or the list is more or less endless. And what iC3D Automate does is it allows automating import and export processes using what is called actions. And now, this is going to get a little bit technical because I have to tell you about how the command line works. I'll show you at the end a demo of how this can be integrated into FileTrain, for example, so that you can see how I could make an automated workflow based on hot folders that picks up these models and processes them through iC3D Automate. But I do want to take a little bit of time to tell you what the possibilities are. And the iC3D Automate command line may be long, but it's not complicated. In fact, there are 3 basic commands, or 3 basic things that you can use, 3 basic parameters. The first one is input, which specifies obviously what the input file is. Then you have action parameters, 1 or more, and then I have an output parameter. The input is always an iC3 file. A file that is created in iC3D Suite and saved becomes a file with an extension .ic3, and that is the only input that I can use in iC3D Automate. Think again of these examples that I gave. In both of these examples, the first step was developing the iC3D model. Well, that is the model that you then specify as the input step. The output step doesn't necessarily tell you or specify the exact output file name, but it will specify where those output files are saved. And then the action steps that you have in the middle, those are the things that you use to actually do something with the command line call. So which actions can you do? Well, the first 2 that I listed here have to do with that idea of I have to create variants. And the first action is replace art, which is an action that replaces a piece of artwork, so a PDF file or an Illustrator file, and it applies that to a label, basically. And that label could be, think of a label as the label that you have on a wine bottle. So I can replace the artwork that I have on something like that. But in iC3D terms, a label is also any part of a model where you apply artwork on. So if I have a cardboard box that is folded, think of the T example again. If I have that cardboard box that is folded, then the outside and the inside of the cardboard box can be changed using replace art. Replace texture is used to replace one of the textures for one of the models in your file. And what's a texture? Well, think of a little container with baby food, for example. I have a label on the outside of the container with the baby food, and there's carrots on there or whatever else is in baby food. Well, the actual glass that I'm going to use for that container I'm going to want to give a color. If it's carrots, there should be something in there that resembles carrots. So I'm going to use a carrot texture image to represent that. And replace texture allows you to replace automatically those texture images used by parts of models or by individual models in your iC3 file. And that those two together allow me to change the artwork that goes on the outside of the container, and when it's necessary to also change certain aspects, visual aspects of the model, change the material of the model if you want. So that's the first class of actions. The second class of actions has to do with exporting images. And what you see is that there is a way to set the camera position, either by simply specifying a bunch of numbers or by specifying a camera preset file that you can save in iC3D Suite. So that will change the yaw and pitch of the camera and the zoom factor of the camera. And then I have an action to create a JPEG and an action to create a PNG. So specifying the render JPEG action will instruct iC3D Suite to export an image of that model that I am working with. I also have export actions for the other formats that are supported by iC3D Suite. Export DAE will export a Collada file. Export 3D PDF, well, export a 3D PDF file. Export iC3 might seem strange, but that does indeed export the iC3 file. And why would I use that? Well, if I use the replace art or replace texture commands, I'm actually modifying the iC3 file to create a variant, and the export iC3 command will allow me to save that variant to disk. So I can have an input iC3, a number of actions, and then an output iC3 for the variant. And I'll be showing that later on in the demo as well. And then the last one is export OPSIS. That will take the URL of an OPSIS server, a username, a password, some additional meta information that you can use in OPSIS to search for models, and that will convert the model to what OPSIS needs on that web platform and then upload the result to the OPSIS web platform that you specify. Now, these actions are nice, but the important part is that I can have multiple of them, of course. So I can have a command line where I say, where I use a camera action and then a render JPEG action. And the result would be that camera sets a particular view on the model, and then render JPEG will export a JPEG image specifically for that view. So think of it as putting the model in the right location in order to take a picture, and then taking a picture with render JPEG. And because I can have multiple actions, I can actually do that multiple times. So I could say camera render JPEG, camera render JPEG, and that would give me the possibility to, in one command line with iC3D Automate, have two different images of the model, perhaps one from the right-hand side and one from the left-hand side. And you can continue to build on that as much as you want. The third example that I have there would export a JPEG image and a PNG image of the same camera position. And then the last example is actually also a nice one that would allow me to specify some replacement artwork for a label in my model. Would replace a texture image for one of the objects I have in my model, and then it would set the model in a particular camera position and export a JPEG. So all of these dynamic combinations of actions are possible in the application. Now, how do you drive a command line app? Well, I could write scripts. That's the first possibility. And it's actually not a bad possibility. It's not that difficult to do so with iC3D Automate. But in an attempt to make things easier, I have developed an example in FileTrain. And if you're not familiar with FileTrain, it's worthwhile taking a look at that. FileTrain is an application that allows you to automate a whole range of repetitive tasks. And you see a long list on there. I'm not going to be reading all of those, but basically moving files around, renaming them, presenting them to external applications to get things done. You have the possibility to read and write XML files. You have the capability of using databases to get information from them or write information from them. All of that is possible, together with getting files from help folders, having timed actions that run once a day or once an hour or something like that. All of those things are possible. So I'm not going to give more introduction to FileTrain because I want to show it to you together with iC3D Automate, because of course FileTrain can automate command line apps, and iC3D Automate is a command line app. So you would think that those two things would work together well, and they do. So let me go to FileTrain. It's what you see here on my screen now, and what you basically have here is a list of stations. Each of these stations, the naming can be a little bit misleading actually, because stations typically don't move. Well, these do. These stations represent different automated workflows that I have built, and you can see by the names of these stations that you can do things like pre-flight. I can use an application such as a PDF chip from Callas to create business cards. I could do simpler things like zipping things, giving files a unique name. Some of these communicate with databases and so on. But I have two workflows in here that I build with iC3D Automate. And let me show you what the first one does. This one says create high-res images with Automate. So I'm going to take an iC3 file, and I'm going to put that in the input folder of that station. And this will take a few seconds. Because in fact what is happening now is that iC3D Automate, and if I go to my task switcher, you can see it running here. iC3D Automate will be started by FileTrain, and it will execute all of the commands I have on the command line for it. We'll have a look at what exactly those are in a second. There we go. It's done. It's done a fair bit of administrative housekeeping meanwhile. That means that it took the log file that was created by iC3D Automate, and it put that in a folder. That folder automatically gets the current date in the name, just to keep things tidy. The original file was moved into another folder, again with the current date. Of course, if you don't need the original file anymore, there is no need to keep it. I'm just doing this here to make a point. And then in output, I now end up with 4 images. And those 4 images, they are named already, down, left and right, up, left and right. And if I look at what those are, you can see that they are in fact 4 different views of that same T box that I showed you before. The camera position that this was taken in, of course, is something that I put in there in FileTrain. And the lighting, you can see that this one is rather white for the gold T42 label. That's because the lighting plays on the box in that way. So the lighting setup and everything else is decided in the original model in iC3D Suite. So if you don't like that, that can be adjusted in iC3D Suite in the original model. If you want other camera positions, that's something that you would instruct iC3D Automate to do. Now, how does this work in FileTrain? So that's what this does. I throw a single iC3 file in here, and I have an output automatically of 4 images. You saw that it takes some time, but it would take much more time if I wanted to do this in iC3D Suite, because I would have to go through the steps in a manual fashion, and I would have to sit there while iC3D Suite exports these images for me. How does it work? Well, the main thing that I have here is an input folder. This input folder is what is used by FileTrain to watch. So that's where I put my iC3 file in. You have a whole lot of parameters that you can set up in FileTrain to make that work. And then what I'm doing here is a little bit complex in the sense that I don't immediately call iC3D Automate to make my life easier. I'm actually writing a script file first. That's what you see here. And the script is very easy to write and to maintain. And then that script in the next action is run. So I've split the process up in two pieces. First, I write a little command script, and then I run that using FileTrain. And the script should now be very familiar because it mentions all of the different command line arguments that we just talked about in the presentation. So you have an input line. FileTrain allows you to use variables. And what you see here, this file path is a variable that will be replaced with the name and path of the document that I put in the input folder, so the file that is being processed. So that's what happens here, the input. At the end, you can see output that specifies what the folder is where I want images that are being rendered. And then I had 4 images. Well, you have 8 action commands in here. And those action commands set the camera position and then export a JPEG image. And because I have that 4 times, I will end up with 4 different images. And setting the camera position, again, is relatively easy. This is yaw, so how high above or low the how high or low the camera is. That's the best way to put it. And then this is the pitch of the camera, which means what is the horizontal position of the camera with regards to the object. 320 is simple. That's well, it's not simple, but it's on the right-hand side. You can trust me. You don't actually have to know this by heart. I can open this up in iC3D Suite and go to the camera presets dialog window, and that one will tell me what the numbers are that I want. So I can simply move the object in the position that I want it, and then I can look at what the numbers are for that. And then this 335 is a zoom factor. What if I wanted 5 images? Well, that's the advantage of what you have going on here in this script. So if I wanted 5 images and maybe I want one that is a front view of that image, then I could very easily do that. I would have to check the number, but I'm reasonably certain that 0 here will give me a front view of that object. So I can simply add another camera action, I add another JPEG action, and I'm done. So this can very easily be expanded into what you want. If I wanted something that exports 3D PDF, I could say action 3D PDF, and then this I have to do to keep the command line intact, and that would then also I think it's export 3D PDF. That would then also export a 3D PDF version of the file for me. And in the same fashion, I could export this to OPSIS or export the Collada files and so on and so on. So this is a relatively simple workflow example where I throw a single iC3 file in a hot folder. That file is picked up and is, well, 4 and now 5 images will be generated as a result. Of course, the advantage here is if I have 100 iC3 files, I simply drop them in the input folder and FileTrain will happily work through them until all of them have been converted into images. Right now, these images are dropped in the output folder with the name of the original file and then some additional suffix added. But this, of course, could also be changed. I could have a subfolder with the name of the model and put the images in there. All of those kinds of things are quite easy to do in FileTrain once you have the basic stuff going. So that's one example. The other example, and before I go in, I will take these files, these folders that I have, and drop them into the input folder. The reason that I'm doing that already is because I know they take some time to process in iC3D Automate. It's that same T package again. But now this flow does something different. This is the create variants flow that I have there. So the idea there is that it is used for artwork replacement. And because I wanted to do something that was a little bit flexible, I actually came up with a nice way to encapsulate that. So if you look in one of these folders, and let me open this in a separate tab. So if I look at this folder, what do I have in the folder? Well, I have a front artwork file. This is actually the artwork that is shown on the outside of the T package, but you can see that it has a different color than the one I had before. If I go up a level and I go to my nice mousse tea, don't ask me how these things taste, but they look different. So this is the mousse one, and this is the maple one. Both have a similar size, not similar, they're actually identical size and shape, but they have different graphics on them. So those are replacement files for the outside of the package. And this particular package actually also has inside artwork. You haven't seen that in iC3D Suite now because I didn't open the package in iC3D Suite. I could have, but I have inside artwork for this as well. And if I look at my mousse tea, then this is a very light pinkish inside artwork for that one as well. So 2 artwork replacement files, and then I have tcarton.ic3, and this is actually the same iC3 file that I opened before to show to you. So this is the base file that we're working with, and that XML file that lives in that folder is the key to making it a little bit flexible. If I open that in Sublime, and normally that doesn't take that long, so I'm thinking that iC3D Automate is doing something as well. Let me try that again. Let's take a different editor if that one doesn't want to participate. There we go. So if I open that XML file, you can see that it has a very simple structure. This is just something I came up with. The structure is the model. This specifies the base model in that folder that I want to replace. This example assumes that all the files live in that input folder that I drop in FileTrain. But of course, you could also create something that takes absolute file paths. And then I have a specification to set up this, to do this replacement. These are basically all the replacement, the parameters that you need to specify to iC3D Automate. So what you need to specify is the name of the label that you want to replace. Let me just open one of these files to show you that this is the original file. And if I look at the XML file, you can see that there is a label name called carton artwork. Well, if I open the model, you can see that this piece, which represents the artwork that I have on this box, is called carton artwork. So the XML file says, look for a label called carton artwork and replace that with cartonfront.ai, so that's the replacement file, and this is the front file. So this is on this particular model, this is the exterior graphics file. And you can see that it specifies the same label with the back artwork, and then it says this is the back of the artwork. There is also optionally an offset that you can set, but for these graphics, I don't need that. Okay, so I have 2 of these replace art elements in the XML file. Of course, this XML file could be expanded to do other things, replacing textures, as I said, or maybe you could make it so that it will be used to export, to specify which images you want to export and so on. The sky is the limit, really, but this is a very limited example so far. So let me go look at my original folder in there. And while I was talking, iC3D Automate actually completed work. And if I look at the log file, you can see that it says starting action replace art, finished starting action replace art. This is the back file, finished with that, and then created an output file for the export iC3 action that we have. And if I now open up the iC3 file that it created. So if I open up that iC3 file, you can see that I have the same model as what I had before. The positioning is the same, the lighting conditions are the same, the reflection in the floor is still there, so everything is the same except for the actual artwork that I have on that box. Right, and the other file that I have in there is the same. I'm not going to open it now, but the Moose T file would be exactly the same, replaced artwork on there. And of course, this workflow that I built in FileTrain could have dropped the output files into the input folder of my image workflow, and then I would automatically have generated the different pieces of high-res images that I wanted to or needed to send to a client. How does that look in FileTrain? Again, very similar to what you saw before. There is an input folder, there is a script that is written, but because of the fact that we're parsing an XML file, the script is now written in different pieces. This is the first line where you have the input command, then the end line contains the export command for iC3 and then the output command. And in between, I have a little loop that will replace art commands for iC3D Automate. And those replace art commands are specified with all of the variables that I got from the XML document. Yeah, so it's the same concept. There is a script that is being built, but because I am parsing an XML file and running over the XML file and getting bits and pieces of it, this time the command file is actually also built in bits and pieces. And then there is a very short command that simply runs that script that I have, and the original iC3 file. The original iC3 file is dropped into an originals folder. So that's what I wanted to show. Let me go back to the presentation very briefly. If you have any questions, now would be a good time to enter those in the GoToWebinar control panel. That's what I wanted to say. And what I haven't talked about actually, and that is as a summary, is not bad either. What I haven't talked about is money. You could assume that this is going to be a very, very expensive solution. Well, first of all, in order to do this, in order to build this kind of workflow, you definitely need iC3D Suite itself. So you need the application, the interactive application to build models. That comes in at just under 10,000 euro, which if you would look at alternatives on the market is actually a very, very good price for something that is, as far as I have experience with it, better than the alternatives that are out there. If you want to then set up the automated workflow, you definitely need iC3D Automate, and that has the exact same price as iC3D Suite. Now, where iC3D Suite normally is something that you would install on one or more workstations, you actually get a floating license, so you can use it with multiple people, of course not at the same time, but you could install it on 5 different workspaces throughout the company. Well, iC3D Automate is the automated component, and you would of course install that on a server somewhere on a central machine. But the price is the same as the license for iC3D Suite. And then you have options. You could implement a workflow around iC3D Automate through scripting, something like terminal scripting on the Mac or on Windows. That you could do for free, other than the time that you spend on developing the script. But if you have an application that can automate it, of course, you also have to count the license price for that application. But in many cases, you'll already have that. Just to make that very clear, if you have something like Automation Engine normally can automate command line applications, so you should be able to do something with that. If you have Switch, you can certainly do that. I have examples with and Focus Switch as well, where I use the JavaScript integration or the JavaScript possibilities to drive iC3D Automate, so that definitely works as well. If you have FileTrain, you just saw that you can do it with that. And FileTrain of all of those is definitely the least expensive option. FileTrain comes at 2,500 euros, give or take, and that's just as iC3D Suite. FileTrain is a non-modular application, so everything in one package, you pay 2,500 euros and you have all of it. Just as a side note, all of those applications come with 20% yearly maintenance on top of that price that you see there. That maintenance is required for the first year. After that, it's up to you whether you want to prolong that or not. And of course, there is a rental option for all of that. Okay, let me very quickly summarize. I don't see any questions that haven't been answered yet, so that's good. To summarize, I talked a little bit about iC3D Suite to do this packaging visualization. That's the interactive application with which you can do that. Then we talked about the fact that if you start playing with iC3D Suite, you very quickly end up in a situation where you also have a bunch of automated tasks that need to be done, and of course you can do that. In iC3D Suite manually, but manual labor is expensive as well. So you have a possibility to automate those. One potential application that can automate those is FileTrain, and you saw a number of examples of FileTrain together with iC3D Automate. One question I haven't answered yet, is there a tech guide? I'm assuming that you want to know if there is a documentation about this. Yes, it's still preliminary, but there is documentation for it. There is no API as such. There is only a command line. So if you want to build this into a web portal or an MIS or whatever else it is, you will need to do some scripting that calls the command line version, which is actually the same as what we have for many of the other applications that we distribute. PDF Toolbox is exactly similar, for example. Good. That is what I wanted to talk about. As I said in the beginning, if you have additional questions, or if you have something that you want to talk about offline, or if you want to try this or see a demo with your files, just get in contact. Our contact email addresses are always the same. You can email orders if you just want to buy. We would like that, but we understand you might also have some questions before that, and you can use support@4ps.com for that. Or if you have something that you want to share with me or ask me, then you have my email address on the slide there as well, david@4ps.com, and that will arrive in my mailbox. Thank you very much for joining. I'm sure I will see many of you again for a next webinar. Thank you very much. The only thing that I'm left with is to wish you all a very nice rest of the day or end of the day, depending on where in the world you are. And until next time.